My wife was cheating on me with several men in our own bed. Here's how I got my revenge and moved on. A few years ago, in early August, I was the chief engineer for a design-build construction company and often traveled out of town for work. This week was no different. My flight out of Hartsfield-Jackson was scheduled for 7:21 a.m. the next day, which meant a 4 a.m. wake-up call. So I left work early on Monday to get home and prepared as expected. My work in Baton Rouge turned out to be problematic, and I spent Tuesday afternoon, evening, and half of Wednesday troubleshooting. Our on-site project manager, Etherly, hopefully learned from this experience, but I'll be keeping a closer eye on him in the future. Wednesday afternoon, I headed out on I-10 to meet my coworkers in New Orleans. Mary Joyce, who had been working with me on the project. Mary Jo, a construction manager I had trained in Atlanta, was going on maternity leave soon, and as her friend, I was monitoring her project closely to make sure everything was documented for her successor. Not surprisingly, Mary Jo had everything under control. After dinner with Mary Jo and her husband on Wednesday night, we had a planning meeting on Thursday morning. Then I caught a flight out of Louis Armstrong Airport and navigated the Atlanta traffic to get to my office by 1:45 p.m. I had a couple of hours to kill before I left for the day. I reported to my boss, Mr. Strickland, on the Baton Rouge project, recommending closer supervision and updating him on Mary Jo's progress in New Orleans. He agreed with my suggestions and told me to take the rest of the day off after submitting my expense report. I quickly finished my expense report and was about to text Reagan that I'd be home early when Ethan Gardner, my best friend since 3rd grade and coworker for 6 years, walked into my office and closed the door. "Better now, but I'm exhausted. Mr. Strickland told me to take the day off, so I'm heading out." Ethan's face darkened, and I laughed, clarifying, "No, I'm not fired. Mr. S. just gave me the day off to compensate for the extra hours I spent cleaning up the mess in Baton Rouge. I'm planning to get flowers and wine." Ethan interrupted, "Trent, this isn't about work, it's about Reagan." "What's wrong with Reagan?" I was terrified. Why hadn't anyone contacted me if anything had happened? "Trent, she's been unfaithful while you've been traveling." Anger flared as I looked at Ethan. My lifelong friend Reagan had admitted to being a free spirit in college, but she'd promised to settle down when we got serious, to see a therapist to help her transition. I trusted her. Ethan looked pained. "I'm serious, Trent." Jake Campbell heard from Clay that Reagan had been unfaithful. Clay's boyfriend was involved with her and he found out she wasn't exclusive. My world was shattered when Ethan spoke, confirming my worst fears about Reagan. I knew it wasn't true and I was furious at Ethan for believing such a stupid joke. I knew my wife better than anyone and my anger was directed at those who were spreading it. I was also angry at Ethan, my best friend, for helping to spread this nonsense. "Ethan, it's not true, not one word of it. If you ever repeat it, I will beat the hell out of you. Now get out before I decide to do it anyway." 150 pounds, had always been a skinny, nerdy kid. He knew I could make good on my threat. He looked down, shook his head, and then looked up with pain in his eyes. "Trent, I'm sorry, we've been best friends for a long time, and I don't want to hurt you, but if I didn't tell you, you'd end up hurting more. You know you have a temper, and I had to calm you down a lot in high school to keep you out of trouble. I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't think it was true. Here's the name of an investigator my cousin hired when he thought his wife was cheating on him. No, it's the truth." I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. Ethan was right. We've been best friends since his family moved next door when we were kids. He was the quiet nerd who kept us out of trouble, and I was the flashy athlete who got us out of messes we'd made. We went to different colleges, but I recommended him for a job at my company and we worked together for 6 years. While I didn't believe Ethan's story, I realized he must have believed it and was trying to protect me. "Was she your cousin's wife?" "Oh yes, Miss Hyo checked her out." Ethan grimaced. He divorced her but still sees her twice a week for the kids. He loves his kids and would do anything to protect them. Without them he probably would have destroyed them and ended up on death row. "I'm sorry, man." Ethan picked up his phone and left my office, closing the door behind him. I was left alone to think about his accusations and what he had said about his cousin. I felt sorry for the guy and especially for the kids. Reagan and I discussed expanding our family, hoping for a boy and a girl. I tried to calm down before packing up and heading home. I drove trying to forget what Ethan had said, but the seed he had planted was festering as I pulled onto the highway. No, I didn't believe it. Not for a second. In fact, I refused to believe it. The whole thing seemed ridiculous, but it was serious. As I drove north on I-75, I considered telling Reagan but decided against it. There was no need to make her angry with lies like that. Even if they were coming from Ethan. After a quick stop at the grocery store, I walked into the kitchen and Reagan threw herself into my arms. "You're home early," she said before our lips met, making up for lost time since Tuesday morning. She added, "I worked late the last 2 nights so I could leave early today to say hello to you. God, I missed you so much, Trent." I grinned thinking about how beautiful and funny she was. I dismissed the nonsense Ethan's girlfriend had been spreading. I knew Reagan loved me and would never cheat on me. Ethan's story was out of my mind as Reagan fell asleep content. I tried to read but my thoughts were consumed by what Ethan had said. I knew the accusations were false and I had to prove it to Ethan to save our marriage. Driving to work on Friday, I decided to contact the private investigator Ethan had mentioned, not to prove that Reagan had cheated, but to prove that she hadn't. I called Donna Hightower's office and made an appointment for Monday afternoon. I arrived early. I entered the office at 10 minutes to 2. Before I married Reagan, I had kept a large investment account in my name which allowed me to hire an investigator without her knowledge. At 2 I was ushered into a conference room where a tall, attractive black woman in black pants, a white shirt and a red scarf was waiting for me to meet her. Her firm grip and probing eyes suggested she was sharp and experienced. "Hello, Miss Hightower. I appreciate you meeting with me on such short notice. My problem is simple. I travel frequently and someone has spread a rumor that my wife is cheating on me. I want you to prove it isn't true." She began asking questions and I told her everything I knew about the allegation and Reagan. Her questions were insightful and she took notes, especially about Reagan's carnal history before our relationship. "Mr. Rowe, according to your client information sheet, you have a bachelor's and master's degree in engineering from Georgia Tech. How familiar are you with the philosophy of our legal system, particularly the burden of proof?" I didn't expect that. I took an introductory philosophy course in college and have been a witness in a few lawsuits at my firm, but I'm not well versed in the details. Proving that your wife is not having an affair is proving a negative, which is difficult. For example, you can prove that a wine glass was not broken by showing that it is intact, but proving that a person did not do something is harder. I can prove that I did not rob a bank yesterday with an alibi, but proving that I did not do something last week, last year, or 10 years ago is nearly impossible without consistent records. In your case, we can observe your wife for a period of time and determine whether she is having an affair during that time, but we cannot prove that she was not having an affair before our observation began. So proving a negative doesn't work here, I muttered, realizing she may be right, but if we watch her and find nothing, we can infer her actions, we can uncover past behaviors if they exist, but we can never definitively say she never had an affair. If this works for you, Mr. Rowe, we'd be happy to take your case. If not, good luck finding someone who can fulfill your request. I understand her point. I hired Hightower's private investigation service. I then spent a few more hours with one of their investigators answering questions. Saturday night after Reagan went to bed, the circuit breaker in the basement tripped. I didn't notice it until Sunday afternoon. The house felt hotter after we got back from church and lunch with some new members. Reagan complained and I said I'd check the circuit breaker. I flipped a few switches, turned it off and on, but nothing changed. "I'll call the HVAC service," I said. "Please, it's too hot to sleep in there tonight." Reagan insisted I call our HVAC company but hung up after 2 minutes in their automated system. Then I called the number Donna had given me. "Hello, hell, this is Trent Rowe. Our AC is out. Can you send someone over tomorrow at 10? "Perfect, thanks." Reagan overheard. "It's too hot upstairs, so we're going to sleep in there." "It's hot upstairs, so we'll sleep in the guest room tonight. It'll be like staying in a hotel." She smiled. Her suggestion made me feel better than I had since Ethan told me the ridiculous accusation. There was no way Reagan could love me that much and do what she was accused of. Monday morning, Reagan made the bed and threw the sheets in the wash. He arrived and started working while I turned on the light switch. An hour later, he was done. These are motion-activated cameras that stay on for 5 minutes after movement stops. They have wide-angle lenses that discreetly capture everything in sight. They're good enough for legal purposes, but not for movies. I paid him for the installation and 2 weeks' rent, thanked him and went to work. When I got home the house was cold. "Babe, I have to add a hotel job in Orlando to this week's trip. I was supposed to be in Tampa Tuesday night but now I'm going to Orlando." "I'm really sorry, I'm going to miss you," Reagan said, "but let's try to catch up a little bit." She smiled, took my hand and led me to the couch in the family room. "I love you, Trent, I love you too," Reagan replied. I meant it. I smiled knowing there was nothing wrong. I smiled, knowing there was nothing wrong with our marriage, despite some idiot's baseless accusations. The meetings in Tampa went well, and the follow-up in Orlando was easy. I usually handled these remotely, but being on site kept our management team focused. I could have left Thursday afternoon, but I chose not to. Reagan wasn't expecting me until Friday night, and I wanted to give Miss Hightower every possible minute to monitor Reagan, but I was confident and she wouldn't cheat. I worked in my hotel room until noon, and in the evening I went to one of Orlando's famous gun ranges. I rented some guns and let the tourists enjoy the machine guns. On Friday I worked on our construction site until it was time to go to the airport. The traffic on I-285 and I-75 was heavy. I was thrilled to walk into the house and have Reagan throw herself into my arms. When she saw my stress, she brought me a beer and we snuggled on the couch. Before heading upstairs on Saturday, Reagan went to the gym and I took care of the yard after getting a drink and watched the Braves game. I checked my personal email. There was nothing from the investigator. I checked again on Sunday while Reagan was out running errands. This time there was a message. I opened it nervously. I mumbled, "Please God, let this just be an update. Dear Mr. Rowe, your order will be ready on Monday at 11 o'clock a.m. Please contact our office to arrange delivery. Sun Tool Works." Relieved, I deleted the message. Reagan noticed I didn't look well when she got home and I avoided her kisses. "Yes, I don't feel so well," I said. "I don't want you to get sick. Let me hug you and then you lie down while I make dinner." She hugged me and I worried, just stroking her back and resting my head against her. I smelled flowers, not her usual scent. I didn't eat Sunday night and got up early Monday. The scent in her hair was different and made me question things. I tried to dismiss it as a perfume sample. After confirming the appointment Monday morning, I arrived at Miss Hightower's office just before 11 o'clock a.m. She greeted me and waved me to a chair. "Mr. Rowe, we have completed our investigation ahead of schedule and I'm afraid I have some bad news." She slid a file towards me. My world crumbled as I jumped to the photos. There she was with a man in our bedroom. Another photo showed the same scene. "Wait, the guy in this picture doesn't look like the one in the first one," I exclaimed. "I'm sorry, it's all in the report. We documented her with 3 different men in 4 encounters from Saturday to yesterday afternoon. We repeated the second encounter, this time in a private home." What I was stunned. "She went shopping yesterday." Her look was serious and she nodded. "Or Mr. Rowe, Mrs. Rowe shopped Saturday afternoon after her second encounter with lover number 2, and on Sunday she only went to the grocery store. You could check receipts or credit card statements if she didn't go." Miss Hyo shook her head and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Rowe. From the picture of her leaving the hotel with lover number 2, she wasn't at a real gym." "How could that be?" I demanded, overcoming my disbelief. 3 different guys in 1 week and I took care of her before and after." Miss Hyo raised her hand. "I'm not a gym teacher. I'm not a psychiatrist, Mr. Rowe, just a good investigator. Your wife may have a hyper-physical attraction disorder, often called nymphomania. She's gone to great lengths to hide her actions from you." Flowers, I sighed. "The scent in her hair. She showered after seeing him yesterday." "Maybe, but she could have just washed her hair or sprayed it with something." She's meticulous about her appearance and even changes sheets between lovers. More than one spouse has been caught off guard by a stain or a scent, but in our bed I began to recall that she had even changed the guest sheets recently. "Yes, 2 of the 3 nights you were gone, she was with someone in your bedroom." "Don't call them lovers, they're cheating, adulterous idiots." She nodded. "At least one of them." "Yes, we don't know the first's name, and the third isn't Mary." "Mary, but the second one seems to be her regular, lover. He's married, which makes him an adulterer too. We identified him as Noah War 32, your wife's boss at her firm." "Idiot," I sighed, finding his picture in the folder, my fists clenching. "I was about to get to that. Noah W. became your wife's manager a few months ago. It's a big firm with several offices, so maybe he's in a parallel department." I shook my head. "Mrs. Alba." Reagan never mentioned his name and said he was antisocial, but she pointed him out to me once when I picked her up from work. Miss Hyo shook her head in disbelief. "Not social with the spouses of his mistresses. No doubt Mr. War has no criminal record or outstanding warrants, but several unpaid parking tickets. Your wife met him at a bar Wednesday night, drove him to your house for over an hour, then drove him back, got his name from DMV records and confirmed it through a web search." "What a fool," I sighed, trying to control my anger. Miss Hyo continued, "Calm down, Mr. Rowe, we're not done yet. She met him at the hotel on Saturday and again at his residence yesterday. According to tax records, his residence is Mrs. Wolver. If she had arrived a few minutes earlier or your wife had left a few minutes earlier. If she had arrived a few minutes earlier or your wife had left a few minutes later, it could have been a close call too." I hissed. "Her game is over, but she doesn't know it. I used to chase after any woman who showed interest." I admitted it didn't get me anywhere until I met Reagan. "She was the same in college but wanted to settle down with me. She said she loved me but now." Miss Hyo patted my arm. I looked at Noah War's picture. Anger was boiling inside of me. Anger boiling inside me. Miss Hyo grabbed my arm tightly. "Mr. R, I'm sorry for what you're going through. Don't let your pain make you do something you'll regret. Seeking revenge can ruin your life. You could end up in jail, losing your job and everything you've worked for. Now remember, it's her mistake, not yours." She made me nod before I continued, "Be careful. Don't let her actions destroy your future. Stay in control of your emotions. Don't go too far." My thoughts swirled with betrayal, confirmed plans for children, and a desire for revenge. I knew I would never hurt her physically, but I wanted to make her suffer emotionally. "I'll be careful, but she'll feel every bit of the pain she caused me." Miss Hyo sighed but made one last plea. "Please be careful, Mr. Rowe. Don't go too far. It's easier than you think to cross the line." Miss Hyo recommended George C. Godwin as a divorce lawyer. I spent 2 hours in Piedmont Park considering my next steps, then met with him. Mr. Godwin was an older black man, Miss Hightower's younger uncle. He was short, stocky and jovial, unlike his regal and reserved niece. He knew family law and the Georgia legal system inside out. We called each other by our first names and chatted. Before we discussed my divorce, when I showed him the photos, he whistled that answers that what do we need. I handed him the flash drive with all the records that Miss Hyo suggested. He reviewed it and praised his niece's thoroughness. This girl really knows her stuff, Trent, everything looks ready. I'll put it together and let you know when we're ready to file. You can have it done by next Monday. Yes, but it's going to cost you overtime. Do you mind? I then shared my plan and an additional request. His face remained expressionless. Be careful, Trent, you have the right to be angry, but in a court of law, you have to be careful. Looks and mannerisms matter in court. I forced a smile because I knew there was no big river in downtown Atlanta. I came home late Monday, claiming fatigue from a minor ailment. I avoided Reagan by pretending to be sick. I showered and brushed my teeth. Tuesday morning I left early without waking her to catch my flight to Charlotte. Thursday night I made a dreaded phone call. Ethan, it's Trent. I have to apologize. You were right and I was wrong. She played me like a brother. Ethan immediately forgave me and asked how he could help. I stayed home late Friday pretending to be tired. Saturday morning I went to my parents' house to help my dad. I went to my parents' house to help my dad. I went to my parents' house to help my dad. I stayed home late Friday pretending to be tired. Saturday morning I went to my parents' house to help my dad with a project. I wanted to tell him but knew I had to wait. I called Reagan late Saturday to tell her I wouldn't be home until Sunday afternoon. She sounded like she wasn't home and wasn't alone. I had the call with a fake love you Sunday afternoon while Reagan was probably out with someone. Mr. Godwin texted me. I called him, and he confirmed everything was ready. The best friends forever would be serving the papers Monday at 11 a.m. At my request I excused myself from work and left Reagan a note saying I had business to attend to. I went to the office to finalize my plans. Reagan called twice and I told her the case was dragging on and I'd be home even later. I promised to leave early Monday and spend the evening with her. She cheered up and professed her love. I lied, but given her deception, I thought reincarnation would be tough. She hissed when I got into bed that night. The last time I'd be there after she left for work. I went through the house marking everything I owned with light-colored tape. Community property would be part of the settlement or donated. At 7:45 Ethan arrived followed by the moving crew. I helped them get started, then Ethan took over while I packed what I needed. Everything in the truck went to the warehouse. Reagan didn't notice I'd moved my guns to my parents' house on Saturday, almost done and about to leave. Amy, Reagan's neighbor and friend, saw the truck and asked if we were moving. I managed to intercept her before she saw anything. I said with a grin, I'm surprising Reagan with new furniture for our upcoming 5-year anniversary next week. I'm clearing out old furniture and clutter before it arrives tonight. Please don't mention it to her until she tells you. She agreed with a smile and left by noon. The news would probably spread, so I was glad it was almost 11. I tipped the movers generously, shook Ethan's hand, thanked him, and drove to the bank at 9 a.m. I withdrew half the money from our accounts as a cashier's check and then deposited it into a new account at a credit union at 10:45 a.m. I pulled into the parking lot of an office building in Sandy Springs and opened my laptop. I had applied for a new credit card in my name, so I closed the current card with a zero balance. This took longer than expected and I was starting to sweat from the time crunch. By 10:57 a.m. it was done and I logged into our family email account waiting for the scheduled 11 a.m. text message. The process server texted me that Reagan was on her way. Another text followed. She was in the lobby, almost shaking with nerves. Although I wanted to send a more detailed message from Reagan's work email, I heeded Miss Hyo's and her uncle's warnings about going too far. The email to friends and family explained that I had filed for divorce, including 3 photos of Reagan and Noah. The photos were cropped and blurred to avoid explicit details, but were clear enough to show the affair. The message was not sent to Reagan or Noah. I hit send, made sure it was delivered, and logged out. My phone rang at 11 a.m., 03 a.m. It was Reagan. Trent, what the hell is this, a divorce? Why, I thought we were happy. Did you find someone else? I laughed at her hysteria. You thought we were happy? I did too, until I found out what you were doing. Look on the back of the envelope. My lawyer included in the package. I heard her swearing and yelling, promising love like she did during our wedding 5 years ago. Crap, she yelled. Trent, it's not what it looks like. Let me explain. No, Reagan, we're done. My attorney's contact information is in the packet. Contact him if you need anything. I hung up as she continued to yell. She called back, but I sent her to voicemail. Her messages were full of denials and lies which I deleted without listening. I blocked her number immediately after I called my father-in-law Bob. Bob and I were friends as well as in-laws. Hello Bob, this is Trent. I hate to call you at work, but this is urgent and you need to hear it firsthand. The situation just blew up. I heard him swallow. What's going on, son? Bob, I'm sorry to say this, but due to Reagan's inability to honor our marriage vows, I am ending our marriage. Trent? No, I know my daughter died, but things have changed. You can't hold that against her. Bob, I wouldn't do that, but she's relapsed and it's serious. Just 2 weeks ago while I was out of town, she went off the rails. I have locations, dates, times, pictures and videos. It's gotten me out of the picture. I hate to tell you this over the phone. I can't trust her anymore. The papers were filed this morning and she's already received them. No, I can't believe it. She promised me she was past this. She promised all of us, Bob. Her promises weren't enough. It's too late, the love I had for her is gone. I still care about you and your wife, that's why I'm telling you directly. Bob expressed deep regret for his daughter's actions. We said goodbye with regret in his voice. I then called Chess, but it went to voicemail. Knowing that Bob had probably called her, I left a short message. It was now 11:16 a.m. and I continued. It was now 11:16 a.m. and I proceeded with a part of my plan I had doubts about. If I did this I might hurt a stranger who didn't deserve it, but if I didn't I might get hurt more. I put on sunglasses, a baseball cap and a lanyard with a fake delivery company ID. Ethan knew to answer calls between 11 o'clock and 11:30 a.m. As Sunshine Process Serving I chased down Chess and her boyfriend. As Sunshine Process Serving I chewed gum and walked into the building. At the security desk I said, "Hi, TC Rowe from Sunshine Couriers and Process Serving. I have a special package for Mrs. Melissa Waller." The guard frowned. "Such packages go to the receiving center. No, the courts require a photo ID and personal signature." "Photo ID and personal signature, best to do it quietly or I'll have to track her down and cause more trouble." "Wait," the guard said, "what do you want?" "I'll meet her in the lobby, ID her, get her signature and leave." "No hassle," he nodded. "Go upstairs, but you need a visitor's pass. I'll hold your ID while you do it." "Got it." "You have it." "Got it," I agreed and handed him my license. He reluctantly took it and gave me the pass. "Return the badge to get your license back." "Got it," I nodded and went to the third floor. At the front desk I had the same conversation. The receptionist called Mrs. Waver. I threw away the chewing gum and put on my cap. Melissa, in her late 20 or 30 seconds, with tan skin, dark brown hair and dreamy brown eyes, had a worried look on her face. When the receptionist pointed her out, she hesitated before approaching me. "Jan said you have something for me." "No, Mrs. Wer, I'm Trent J. Rowe. You don't need to sign anything, but I need to give you this because it concerns you." "What is it, Mrs. Wer?" "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but your husband was having an affair with my wife," I whispered, handing her a photo of them in bed. "Noah promised me it wasn't a fake. I hired a detective agency to investigate my wife. They confirmed she was having an affair. The documents in the envelope prove it legally." She was whispering and crying. She leaned over to me and I comforted her. "He said the first time was a mistake and wouldn't happen again." "Why?" "I don't know, Mrs. Wer. This time it was planned and happened several times." Details of 3 meetings in 5 days. She grabbed my shirt, shaking her head. She was 5 feet 5 inches. She was much shorter than me. She wiped her tears and looked at me. "I am about to check out for lunch. I will send him a picture of me if you want." "Mrs. Wer, you are a beautiful woman, but revenge is not the answer. You have to live with yourself. Don't do something you'll regret or that the legal system won't agree with." She stepped back. "You're right, I gave him one more chance, but this is the end. We're going to court." I included the contact information for a private investigator and a lawyer who's been working on my case. "He filed the papers this morning." Shocked, she took the envelope and thanked me, then asked, "Can I call you if I need advice?" My number's in the envelope. After visiting the lab, Donna recommended it. I sweated for the next few days while managing a project in South Georgia. The thought of contracting something terrible made me even angrier at Reagan. Fortunately, the lab informed me that I had no STDs by the end of the week. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least that danger was averted. Reagan kept trying to reach me, leaving messages on my work voicemail and cell phone from different numbers. I deleted them as soon as I heard her voice, but she didn't take the hint. When I returned to the office Friday morning, I found more messages and deleted them one by one. Then I used my phone's manual to block her number. "Problem solved," I decided. My mom was especially upset, knowing that Reagan and I had planned to have children. She asked me to reconsider the divorce, saying that Reagan's actions couldn't be that bad. I shook my head and showed her a cropped photo with the date on it. Tears were streaming down her face, but she nodded, finally understanding. She hugged my dad tightly as I waved goodbye and headed to my temporary quarters. The next day, Andy Smith from work rushed into my office with bad news. Trent Mary Gel's water broke. He wasn't happy about having to finish his current project early, but Mr. Strickland thought he was the best candidate. Andy looked panicked with his project still a month away from completion. After reviewing the timelines, Andy and I proposed an alternative to Mr. Strickland to avoid disrupting Andy's project. Would take the New Orleans job in his place and handle major issues on other projects as needed. Later that day we heard that Mary Jo and her twins were doing well. I drove to New Orleans feeling further from Reagan with each mile. By the time I reached the hotel it was late and I slept for a few hours before heading to the site. I spent the morning meeting with subcontractors and reviewing plans. Everything was as expected, so I left early to visit Mary Jo in the hospital. She had already received the flowers I had sent, so I gave her a thank you gift and a certificate for her children in the NICU. Although I couldn't see them in person, I watched them on the monitor as MJ and they looked on lovingly. I was happy for them, but the thought of never having children of my own hurt me. I focused on the project and made it my priority for the next few days. On Friday, I took the construction office staff out for drinks in the French Quarter. On Monday, George Godwin called to check on the divorce. "Are you sure you don't want to talk to her?" he asked. I grinned sarcastically. I heard him laugh. I thanked him and went back to work. That evening at my hotel I received a text from an unknown number. "Hey Trent, my lawyer filed the papers today and Noah has been served. Can we talk when you get a chance? Thank you, Melissa W." It was late, so I texted back and a few seconds later my phone rang. "Hey Trent, thanks for talking to me. Glad. Melissa, how are you holding up?" "It's tough, but I'm managing," she replied uncertainly. "How about you avoiding a deep conversation?" I said. "Sounds like you." "Melissa, what's going on?" After a brief silence, she said, "Trent, I wanted to thank you for exposing what Noah was doing and stopping me from making a rash decision. You could have taken advantage of my vulnerability, but you didn't. I appreciate it. It's not easy, but I'm determined to get through this." "Melissa, it wouldn't have been right for either of us. I'm better now, at least a little, being away from her." "I'm glad to hear your determination." "Definitely. I still have a long way to go, but it's better than it was before." "Good." I considered telling her to call me if she needed to talk, but hesitated. If she needed to talk, but hesitated, her soon-to-be ex was mostly her problem. Though I was collateral damage, I still had plans for him, so I kept quiet. We wished each other luck and said goodbye. Work in New Orleans was going well, but I was also overseeing the Baton Rouge project. I felt like I was in a swamp up to my armpits with alligators. George called a few weeks later with the news, "Trent, Mrs. Rose's attorney wants a consultation. You need to meet with her in person in Atlanta for a few sessions." My blood boiled at her tactics, but George had warned us. We were withholding documentation of her infidelity. Should we present it now? We have to give it to her lawyer, but Judge Johnson might cancel the request. Warn him first. A week later, Reagan's request for counseling was denied, although Judge Johnson suggested she seek help for her carnal addiction. That was one problem solved. For months while Reagan and her lawyer battled George in court, I kept a low profile, hoping she hadn't hired someone to find me. I had George update my will and life insurance to make sure she wouldn't get. When Mary Jo and A's twins were released from the hospital, I visited them for dinner and babysitting. One night the twins cried loudly after their parents left, making me pray for one child at a time if I ever had children. Melissa contacted me several times for support and courage. I was careful not to cross any lines that could be seen as romantic or adulterous. When things improved for Melissa, her messages stopped. When Mary Jo's maternity leave ended, I had a realtor find me a house using pre-Reagan funds. I bought a house using pre-Reagan funds. Reagan funds. I bought a house in Dunwoody a few weeks before MJ returned after almost 3 months in extended stay housing. That I wanted a comfortable home and to get my belongings out of storage. Mary Jo returned to work, but since we had no new project in New Orleans, she planned to be a stay-at-home mom for a while. MJ asked me to consider her for future projects in New Orleans, and I agreed. Second, my return to Atlanta meant leaving behind my unofficial godchildren, MJ and A's children, whom I often babysat. That I would miss seeing them grow up, and it reminded me of being childless because of Reagan. Finally, Reagan dragged out the divorce, but George Godwin assured me that Judge Johnson was fed up, too. When the end was near, I moved into my new home, unpacked, and met a few new neighbors, including a couple of women who had been living with me for a while. A few new neighbors, including a nice divorced woman named Noelle. I thanked her for the brownies but declined her invitation to dinner, explaining that I couldn't date until my divorce was final. Ethan, who didn't understand the Georgia court system, asked, "And are you going to start dating again when the judge finalizes my divorce?" "I don't want anything to affect the settlement with Reagan." "So how is that evil cow doing?" he asked. "I don't know, and I'm not interested. You know you still owe her a big one." I nodded. "I know she'll get it when the time comes." Judge Johnson had had enough of Reagan stalling and scheduled a final hearing for early April. I arrived a few minutes early and saw Reagan approaching. "Trent, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I know, Reagan, but you couldn't keep your vows. You've been away so much. You knew how much I'd be away when you agreed to marry me. I made it up every time except for the last trip when you cheated with your boss and others. After I got back too." She looked angrier than ever with tears streaming down her face. "But I had needs. Several people were watching us. We talked about all this before we got married. You promised your wandering days were over. You failed. Get over it and move on. If you can't find another therapist." She recoiled at my words as more people watched. I walked away. I saw George approaching. "Trent, please," she called, but George and I went to the courtroom. The judge wanted us both present for the final sign to prevent further delays. Reagan had an angry outburst, but the judge silenced her and gave his ruling. The gavel fell, ending our 5-year marriage. I thanked George and walked out. Reagan begged and screamed, but I ignored her. George filed for a restraining order the next day and Judge Johnson granted it. Along with the restraining order, Reagan had to stay away from me if she violated it. A short stint in jail might do her some good, but she was smart enough to disappear from my life. The following weekend I started dating again. I set up a rescheduled date with Noelle. She was nice, but we had little in common other than a long dry spell. When I drove her home, she invited me in and moments later we were in her bedroom. After the second time we both grinned at each other. The second time we both grinned and Noelle snuggled up against me. "Trent, we can do this again if you want," she said, confirming she wasn't looking for anything long-term. I thanked her and went home. Noelle and I remained casual friends but never met again. I dated another woman the next weekend and another in Birmingham during a business trip. After each date I felt devastated, realizing I was no closer to finding the right woman. I needed a friend, lover and lifelong companion to start a family with. Over the next 2 months I began to doubt I would ever find lasting happiness. However, short-term happiness was frequent and enjoyable. "I know, Mom, I bought a house and I'm fixing it up." "Trent, a house isn't a home yet. A man and a good woman can make it one. You need to find a good woman." "I know, Mom, I'll find her. Just give me time," she teased. "If we give you more time, your father and I will be dead by then and we'll never meet." I was surprised to hear from her. After all this time I finished cleaning the paint sprayer and replied, asking her to call me when she could. A few minutes later she called. "Hey Trent, thanks for talking to me." "No problem, Melissa. How are you? We haven't talked in a while and I wasn't sure if you wanted to after everything that happened." I laughed. "Unless you were involved in getting my ex-wife and her husband." "Ex-wife and your husband's ex-husband? I don't hold you responsible for what happened between them or the disaster they created, so I have no reason not to talk to you." "Good, because I swear I had nothing to do with it." "I didn't think you did, so what's up?" "Well, it took longer than expected, but I'm finally free. I even have my maiden name back. Ortiz, I wanted to thank you for your help. You opened my eyes to what he was doing, provided me with evidence for free, and gave me advice on what to do. I went to another lawyer, but you helped me a lot and I'm very grateful." "You're welcome. Don't think about it anymore, okay? It's hard, Trent. You were my guiding light when I was so low and depressed." "I don't know you that well, but I like what I've seen so far, so I'm going to take a chance and do something I've never done before. Will you have dinner with me?" We had a nice dinner, but I spent the evening thinking about how sweet and beautiful she was and what kind of idiot her ex-husband Reagan was. Reagan was just as beautiful but had a dark side that betrayed me. In my eyes she went from an 11 to a negative number. "You stare," she said with a grin almost as big as mine. I grinned and nodded. "It's fun to focus when you have someone so nice to focus on." She blushed and covered her mouth. "Do you want to get out of here and maybe come back to my house?" "I think I'd like that," she whispered. "Please, Trent, take me home or somewhere now. I need it and I can't wait." A few minutes later, as we turned onto her street, Cher reached into her purse and pulled out her cell phone. Pulling into the garage, she said the door was open that night. We didn't leave the bed except for water and bathroom breaks. Thankfully it was Saturday and I didn't have to work. I felt like I could stay with her forever. After our morning date, she fell asleep and I sighed with relief. Heading for the bathroom, the morning light streamed through the open curtain, giving me my first real look at her bedroom. What caught my eye was Melissa's dresser, which was covered with photos. I glanced at them, and one made me stop and pick it up. "Trent, what are you doing?" "Melissa, who's the girl in those pictures?" "That's my daughter Ansley. She's 3 years old and means the world to me. I wanted to protect her from Noah's story. She was a big issue in our divorce. That's why it took so long. I don't want you to meet her until we're sure about us." "Where is she now?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "She's with him this weekend." "Why, is something wrong?" I liked Melissa a lot, but this was a shock. "Melissa, I don't know, I really like you, but if there's one person I dislike as much as my ex-wife, it's my ex-wife." "Wife, it's your ex-husband. I want kids and I want to be involved in your daughter's life if things work out, but if I show up at her events, who else is going to be there?" Noah sighed, understanding. He's a lying, cheating jerk, but he loves her, and every time I see him, it'll remind me of what he did to my ex in my marriage. I'll resent him, and Ansley will feel the tension. She might end up resenting me and hurting our relationship. As much as it hurts me, I think it would ruin everything. She sat up and whispered, "You're saying we don't have a future?" "As much as I'd like to be wrong, no, I don't think we do." She nodded. Tears were streaming down her face. I thought it was too perfect. "Please, Trent, just go away." She touched her phone a couple of times and added, "The garage door will be open for you." She fell back on the bed crying and pulled the sheet over her. I grabbed my clothes and dressed in the hallway. As I left, hating myself almost as much as I hated her ex-husband. It hurt, but inside I knew it would ruin everything. Later that day I went to visit my parents. I gave them a short version of what had happened, but they knew I was hurting more than I was letting on. My mother tried to get more out of me, but I told her it would never work. She gave me a comforting hug and told me everything would be okay, but I found it hard to believe. On Sunday we met my sister and her family for lunch after church. While waiting for a table, she pulled me aside and made me tell her everything. She had helped me through past failed relationships, so I opened up, though I left out the bedroom details, which she probably guessed. She said it won't be easy, but you can do it if you try and realize you really love her. One date doesn't tell you much, more dates can show you if it's worth fighting for. Thanks, sis, you're right, one date doesn't say that at all, but it told me enough to realize that it would hurt more if it failed because of the past. Give it a try, you won't know until you do. I nodded and agreed to think about it. We didn't talk about it again, but it stayed in my head. Ethan, who understood me best, agreed with my thoughts, but after a trip to a factory near range, I wondered if Ethan's luck with women made his agreement a good thing. The following weekend Ethan set us up with a couple of women. We had fun and I didn't dismiss the idea of dating during the divorce. Reagan wanted to keep our house. I made George resist forcing her to sell it since she couldn't afford the buyout without giving up other things she wanted. It was petty, but I felt it was justified. George and Reagan's lawyer were on good terms and George learned Reagan planned to buy condos later. I heard a rumor that Reagan and Noah were getting married. I called George because it could affect my finances. George had argued that Reagan was a cheater and shouldn't get alimony, but the judge awarded her a small monthly amount for 5 years or until she remarried. If she really remarried, I'll check and get the alimony stopped. George said yeah, and it just shows some people never learn, I said, amazed at their continued relationship, which confirmed my decision to end things. George laughed. It's what keeps me in business. It made me reconsider a decision I thought about early in the divorce but never believed possible. After I heard about their wedding, I contacted Will Kleiner, a friend of Reagan's from college, and reconnected when I started dating Reagan. Will and I met for lunch. And I told him what happened. That's terrible, Trent. I'm really sorry. I heard W asked to be transferred to another department. It makes sense. Now they're avoiding conflict with HR. Do you have an official policy on this sort of thing? Sure. If they violate it, they could get in big trouble, and so could the firm. I hate to ask, but can you get me a copy of that section of your personnel manual? Yes. Just don't tell anyone where it is. You got it. The following Saturday, I went on a date and met Will and Lori Kleiner at a Braves game. Will gave me the flash drive, and a few days later I went to George's house to discuss it. Trent, I'm sorry, but even if you can prove that Noah was involved with multiple women, state law won't let you sue. Georgia got rid of alienation of affection in '79, so you can't sue one partner for attracting or distracting another. I hoped that financially punishing the firm would lead to consequences for Noah and Reagan. George smiled. A lot of potential plaintiffs say you can only sue in rare cases where the firm knew and did nothing. Even then winning substantial sums is hard. Damn, I repeated. He laughed. Don't give up hope. Leighton, handle the spousal support issue first and then discuss other options. The next week George, Reagan's attorney, opposed it, but Judge Johnson agreed with us to end the payments. When I brought up the second issue, George told me to be patient. 6 months later, George and I met for lunch with Trent. I suggested waiting because newlyweds need time to settle in. It took 2 weeks, but Donahauer and her investigator found that Noah was already involved with a new subordinate. George packaged the information and gave it to a lawyer friend. We don't want this traced back to you, Trent. If it does and Noah loses his job, Reagan could file for reinstatement of spousal support. She won't hear it from me, and I doubt Noah will tell her. George, smirking, sneaky. His lawyer friend delivered the package to Noah's firm. Will told me Noah was escorted out by security and probably wouldn't be coming back. Reagan cried and asked why, but no one told her. Take that idiot. I said if I keep this up I risk becoming a bitter old man, but that's a risk I'm willing to take. I sent the package anonymously, and the next night I got a call. Trent, Melissa Ortiz yelled, I know you probably don't want to talk to me. I called a friend at the company and learned that there were rumors about his firing. Today I received an anonymous overnight package that explains everything and should help keep my spouse's support the same when Noah files his petition. Trent, I think I know who to thank. As for the package, it seems some people never learn. Noah will probably tell the judge a sad story, but when my lawyer presents the package, I hope the judge uses those very words against him. He just got remarried. I wonder if he started cheating right away this time. Melissa, leave it in the past, just smile and enjoy life. You deserve it. You deserve it. We said goodbye, Probably for the last time. For the first time in a long time I felt like I had survived the ordeal and returned to as much hell as Reagan and Noah had put me through. Reagan was now in a worse financial situation, in an apartment instead of a nice house, with a cheating husband who paid alimony and child support. I had no regrets. As I reflected on what had happened, I realized that I no longer called them derogatory names. That realization made me smile, but it was short-lived. I discovered that despite everything, they still had power over me. I had given up a chance at happiness with Melissa because of my past with Reagan and Noah. Although I dated and slept with many women, I realized that I didn't care about any of them. Melissa was still in my head as much as Reagan and Noah until I could look at her and laugh. I wouldn't be free in that moment. I knew what I wanted to do. I picked up the phone. I found Melissa's number from the day she got the package and called her. "Hi Melissa, this is Trent J. Rowe. Can we talk? Trent, you helped me again when you didn't have to." "I'm listening." There was silence on the line, though I thought I could hear her breathing, so I continued. "Even though I told you to let go of the past, I realized I was still stuck in it myself. I want to apologize for that and ask for a chance to make things right." She didn't interrupt, and I could practically hear Melissa nodding to my relief. She wasn't seeing anyone else, and to my surprise she agreed to give us another chance. We went on another first date the following weekend, intending not to rush things, but sometimes things have their own pace. She invited me in, and we shared wine on the couch and talked until 11 o'clock. A few minutes later, I carried her upstairs and we lay together in silence, hoping it would work out. Over the next few months, we ran into a few bumps in the road, but we found that we agreed on the important things and the little things didn't matter so much. After our second date, I liked her more and more, finally admitting to myself that it was more than just Melissa felt the same, and we started planning a future together. We got married a little over a year after we decided to try again. Ansley was our flower girl, and Melissa was our best friend. Ansley was our flower girl, and Melissa and I said, "I do," and meant it. We've run into Noah a few times since then, but it didn't go as I first feared. The first time, he made a snide remark about taking seconds, but I cut him off in a whisper. Only he could hear Noah. "Thanks for taking Reagan the cheating bitch off my hands. If you think she'll be loyal to you, you're even dumber than I thought, and thanks for making it possible for me to be with Melissa, the real woman you couldn't keep." He almost choked and clenched his fists, but he realized I could have torn him apart. He turned to his young daughter, whispered something, kissed her, and said goodnight to Melissa. Months later, he told her he was divorcing Reagan and realized what I had said was true when he started to suggest something. She cut him off. "Too bad you didn't realize it sooner, Noah. Don't ever mention it again." Since then, Noah hasn't said a word to me, but I see regret in his eyes. I hold Melissa's hand as she squeezes mine as the doctor gives the order. Melissa gives one last push. Finally she leans back and I kiss her forehead as the doctor and nurse work. The midwife looks at us and says, "Mr. and Mrs. Rowe, congratulations, you have a beautiful baby boy." In that moment I realized all the trials and tribulations were worth it. I wouldn't change a thing.